Hello, I'm Ryan Sierra, and before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick preamble for what to expect. Our guest today is a local author with a lot of insightful things to say, but throughout the video, there will be time skips and cuts for a solid 1 hour length, some quick silly bits, and it's very important that the audience at home follows along with the timestamps in the video's description. With that, we wish James Noll the best, and hope he continues enjoying Crimson Lake. Lastly, check out Noll's newest book, Mungwort. Thank you. Good afternoon, I'm Salt.
I'm Vinegar.
And you're watching the Salt and Vinegar podcast. Woo! Today, we're talking with a horror author who has a well-rounded experience in food service, teaching, daycare, and even yogurt making, as per his bio on Goodreads.com. Mr. Noll, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm James Noll. I am a teacher, a writer, and a musician. I'm based out of Fredericksburg, Virginia.
All right, that's awesome. Mr. Noll, can you give us your social medias and any projects you're working on right now?
Best place for social media is Facebook. I believe it's in there as James Noll Author. I'm also on Instagram at James Normal, JAMESNRME or NRML. And then my website is silverhammer.studio, SILVERHAMMER.studio.
Gotcha. So go check that out, guys. And I am on inkit.com as Ryan Sierra. Right now, I am working on my original story, Harrows of the First Noll. It is about an ancient Greek figure from an ancient Greek fairy tale who comes to live in the modern city of Akara and has to adapt to rise and grind culture. Oh, yeah. Diana, what would you like to promote?
I have a bit of polymer clay on my Instagram, and I have my own YouTube channel called Smalls Noodle. But other than that, I don't have any published writings. I like to keep those to myself for now.
So what have we all been reading this week? We'll start with James Noll.
I am reading the third book in the Crimson Lake series. It's a mystery series set in Australia. I don't have the title readily handily right now, but I do know they made they did a TV version of it called Trapo, which is not actually very good. So I'm sticking with the books.
Why is Trapo not very good?
They just messed with a lot of the aspects of the novel that I liked in terms of characterization. There's some casting decisions. I was like, that doesn't really actually work. The novel itself is kind of quirky for a detective novel, for a mystery story. Even so, it still follows all of the regular mystery story beats. And they sapped a lot of what made it interesting in terms of some of the weirdness of the characters and turned it into something that was more standard.
Oh, gotcha. What have you been reading this week, Diana? Or should I say, Vinegar?
Oh, God. Absolutely nothing. I've been playing Stardew Valley.
Well, there's things to read in a video game, isn't there?
Well, yeah, you get strange little weird notes that you can find when you hit stones and stuff, and they're called secret notes. And sometimes they're really weird, but other than that, yeah.
So I've actually been trying to get into Stardew Valley again myself, so I'll have to look for those secret notes. So Diana, go ahead, ask your first question.
Okay.
On the docket here.
Yeah, let me scroll down all the way downtown. So I guess one of my questions would be, James, have you ever read a book, or how sometimes movies send out screenplays that the public has read that you personally loved, and is there any that you've disliked? For me, an example is when after Wonder Woman happened, Joss Whedon did his script for Wonder Woman, and it was absolutely horrible. And I was like, I'm glad they went with the one they did when Wonder Woman came out.
Yeah, no, I I'm not sure if I've ever had that experience. You mean like a movie that came out and then you found out about the alternative that they were planning on doing?
That or like because I know sometimes movies will send out like oh you can read like the screenplays and stuff like that
I re- Honestly,
for some of them.
I've never done that. I mean, for some of the classes that I've taught when I taught creative writing, I would read some of the scripts for some of the Spielberg's early stuff. Let me see, Jurassic Park, I think was one of them, and this isn't Spielberg. It was M. Night Shyamalan's Sixth Sense, and it was interesting reading the script version of it, seeing like what some of the dialogue that might have been cut or some of the plot points that didn't make the movie. But I've never, and I know what you're talking about too. You're talking about the Joss Whedon that had like, I think it was Wonder Woman doing some sort of seductive dance.
Yeah.
Which was a part of it, and that never actually made the final thing. But I've never really gone and looked at any of the alternative versions of movies that I've ended up liking.
Well, have you ever read a book that you didn't like that maybe like other people like are like they rave about? They're like, oh, this is
Sure.
such a great book, and you're like, maybe.
Yeah, there's been plenty. I mean, nothing specific comes to mind, but there have been some where I was like, well, it was okay. It wasn't the greatest. There's a lot of television or movies out there that have come out at they get rave reviews, and I thought was just okay. Yellowstone was one of those, and then they made I guess an offshoot of the Yellowstone universe called Open Range, I think it was called, and it was okay. It wasn't fantastic. I don't know why people were going crazy about it. Let me see, that movie Magnolia was another one that came out. It came out a long time ago. Same director as Boogie Nights, and he just directed Licorice Pizza, which actually I saw. Licorice Pizza was great. Let me look at that guy's name, the director's name. But Magnolia came out and had this, Paul Thomas Anderson. Had this amazing cast, and it was after Boogie Nights, and I loved Boogie Nights, and so I was like, oh, I'm gonna love Magnolia, and I watched Magnolia. I was like, that's okay. it's a little plodding. There's a new series out right now.
Series first because I was like, oh my god, there's a TV series, and I was like, oh, this is great. I was very excited, and then after I showed him season 1 of the show, then I showed him the movie, and he was like, this is good. But I like the TV show better.
Oh, that's funny.
I
was in reverse. I liked the movie, but I tried to watch the TV show, and it was too derivative of the movie, so I ended up not watching it.
Yeah, I guess that definitely has to be a case of what you see first. Changes the experience. Yeah.
Well, Mark Hamill's in the 3rd season.
Yeah, of the show. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's so funny because there's this because one of the characters pretends to be, his name is like Jackie Daytona, and he like because he breaks away from the group and he becomes Jackie Daytona, and Mark Hamill's character is also a vampire, and he comes in and Laszlo, aka Jackie Daytona, goes, hey Jim, you've left your card here, and Mark Hamill's character is like, how do you know my name? And then Laszlo's like, you left your card here that says Jim the Vampire. And then Mark Hamill's like, oh, okay, yeah. And then grabs the card and then comes in. It's amazing, and we hope he like comes back to the show because he really likes it. But yeah, no, it's like I've had those things. I think I know everyone really likes Dark on Netflix.
Yeah, it's a German show, I believe.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And I just can't, I don't know, like, I've watched so many kind of, I guess, like it, that I don't know, like, I'm trying to watch the first episode, and I'm like, maybe.
That came around in the middle of the pandemic, I think, when they were looking for more content to put out, because there was that strangulation in the pipeline of creating new shows, and so they started mining some of their foreign assets, and yeah, it was just a matter of timing for me. I was like, it's okay. Sometimes I don't mind reading the subheadings or the closed caption if they have them, but in that case, I think I'd watched so many foreign shows by that point. I was like, all right, it's just another one I'm gonna have to read.
I use subtitles like all the time, and sometimes Ryan like jokes about it, but I'm like, I can't tell what they're saying if I don't have it.
Yeah.
I need it.
Yeah, us millennials are an oddly boomery generation because we're like cycling back to like reading everything again, as opposed to like strictly like watching stuff.
Well, no, because sometimes the actors go a blah, 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 and then the captions tell me what they say, and I'm like, thank God, or else I wouldn't know what you're talking about.
It's true, especially if you want to watch a show like quietly.
It's also funny when like characters speak Spanish and they'll say like the first few words where it's like hello, and then it's like how, and then the rest of it is Spanish speaking, and it's like, how am I supposed to know what the rest is? I would like to know the rest of the sentence.
Oh God, that reminds me of a really dumb cliche that happens when there's foreign languages being spoken in like a drama series. Have you ever seen the scene where like a character will like there'll be like a villain and they'll speak like a foreign language, and then like a translator of some kind who's like some federal agent will speak the foreign language, and then instead of speaking back, the villainous character will go like, "Your Spanish is so good," or like or they'll start speaking in like, or it'll often happen in like Chinese action movies where like someone will speak in two characters will speak in Chinese, and then at the very end they'll just start speaking in English again, revealing all along that they knew like English as well. That's such a weird like trope that happens in like action movies with foreign languages.
It's so bad.
Question 2 for me to you, James. What do you think about using AI art for promotion? I know you're in touch with a few artists, and I was looking at the books that I bought from you at the Comic and Toy Convention, and you know Bill Harris, and that's so funny because I have a passing cursory acquaintanceship with Bill Harris too. I have, however, myself for any arts with projects I'm working on, I don't know any like real up and coming artists, and I often find myself using AI art. How do you feel about using artificial intelligence art?
I don't think I've ever used any AI art, mainly for, you just pointed out, I know so many artists in town who do a good job, or I've made some relationships with some book cover artists. If anything, I'll use some of the stuff that you can get. I'm not sure if it would be called stock or not, but you can look for theme-related arts in some of these pay sites, and not computer-generated. But I do understand it costs a lot of money, and if you need to do it, then it's just another tool in your toolbox if you need to use it.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at right now. Is just saving on that wallet and getting into some free AI art. I don't know if you've seen the trend. There's like a ton of AI art apps on like phones and stuff. There's like Dream and all these. There's some like TikTok apps where people will just plug in a prompt and some artificial intelligence will come up with a spooky like scene. And sometimes I'm just thinking like these would be great for book covers.
In terms of AI, I got to look it up again, but there's something online that is an AI. I wouldn't call it plot generator, but it helps with portions of a story, a beat, a scene, a characterization that you might be struggling with as a writer. And it'll give you it's almost like story starters, maybe a sentence or two, or it might provide some expository details, and you do have to plug some information in to get where you need it to go. And it's a pay by subscription thing, but it's to me that's just another tool that you can use to make whatever it is that you're trying to make, especially if you're stuck. It's no different from talking to an editor or talking to a friend or collaborating with somebody. But I didn't know that they were doing that with art. It doesn't surprise me. I know all the AI stuff is getting smarter and more robust every day. Especially if you're thinking about, and I know if you've listened to a TikTok reel or anything online now that has a voiceover, it sounds like AI generated just because it's just human enough and just robotic enough to sound. I'm sorry, just human enough to sound human, but it's definitely robotic. It's like, I went to the store the other day. It's like, oh, okay, that's definitely AI. But it sounds human, and they're getting better and better at it, to the point where there's probably going to be a lot of audiobooks that will be narrated by AI. At this point, you can plug, I think it's called Lyrebird, and you can read sentences. They feed you these sentences over and over again, and they're looking for syntax and diction and vowel sounds and consonant sounds from your voice. And the idea is to continually read these sentences over and over again until the computer can generate a mirror image of your voice. And then you can plug text into it and it'll read it back to you in your own voice. It's not perfect yet. It definitely sounds more robotic than human, but it's there, and pretty soon it will sound human. So all those things, I think, if you use them artistically and don't just rely on the algorithm to create something, I think are just they're benefits.
Yeah, oh, for sure. That reminds me, apparently, the human voice is actually a series of harmonies. There was a TikTok I watched that studied like auditory perception and the coming together of sounds, and what they did was they recorded their voice into like an audio program that actually stripped it apart 7 different ways, and each way was actually a note in of itself, and then when they put all the notes together, it made a human voice. So
Oh,
it was
wow.
actually really bizarre. Yeah, so I was like, interesting. So I guess they'll have to figure out how to work on harmonies with these AI voices to make them sound more human.
Huh.
So, Diana, next question from you.
Okay, so I just kind of came up with this because I remembered Percy Jackson,
Okay.
and that was my So I know, I know a lot of series these days usually have like 5 or like 6 books. I was wondering, James, of like, what do you think is like a good cutoff point for like a book series? Like, what do you think is like a good amount of books, or what do you think like the series should kind of like end, and maybe the author had like too many in that series, or where they should have cut off a bit earlier?
Yeah, nothing specific comes to mind, but I know what you're talking about. In terms, I think trilogies work really, really well. Humans like odd numbers, just because it just feels right. You got the first novel is setting all the expository stuff, and it can stand alone. Second novel is an expansion of the universe and the plot, and the third novel is the third act. It's kind of wrapping everything up. And so that 3 act structure is just built into what human beings like to consume for entertainment. It could
Yeah.
be 5 or 7 as well. I know. Was the Harry Potter series 7 books long? These 7 books. Um, but yeah, 3, 5, or 7 seems to work. And if it goes on too long, if there's there's a lot of detective fiction does this. You're just following the detective as he goes on all of these different mysteries and solves all these different problems. And people will read those because they like that particular character and they like the style of writing. But after a while, it just kind of gets boring because you know the beats that a mystery novel is going to hit, and then you just kind of get tired spending time with that character or those characters. And people want to have the end. They want everything to be resolved. I know when my kids were little, they watched Pretty Little Liars, and that was just cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger, and it never
I
ended.
never got into that. I tried when because I remember when it was like a hit TV show, and I
Yeah,
just couldn't get into it because like eventually later down the road, a lot of fans say like that they didn't even stick to their cliffhangers, and they were bringing out characters who were supposed to be dead, and it was like,
yeah, yeah.
what's happening here?
Yeah,
Um,
I think the old way of doing television too, like in the 70s and 80s when I grew up, television was for advertising essentially, and so that's why you'd have these endless plots and cliffhangers that they lied about or would come up with some sort of convoluted reason for why the person wasn't dead anymore. And so really it just depends on the purpose of the author when the author set out to write it. Were they trying to write a trilogy, realized it got popular, and then started adding on all these stories afterwards just because it was selling? Or did they have the end point in mind and they said, no, I'm running a 5 book series, including this whole thing, and it's got an arc. And you can tell sometimes. I think The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I loved. I loved the original trilogy, especially when I was in high school. But then I think he wrote a 4th book in the trilogy, which of course, haha, it's funny. It's because it's Douglas Adams. But, it was clear that he was just writing it because, people were going to buy it.
I could do 5 because Percy Jackson. I think Twilight has 4. I can get through that pretty easily. Past that, it's very hard for me. So I was just like curious on on that like scenario, because
Yeah.
you know, depending on what it is.
I think it just all depends on the goals of the author, and if they set out to write something and had a nice solid arc that they spanned out across 3, 5, or 7 novels, and it was satisfying and had a great ending, and then they started adding on to it just to add on to it. That's one thing versus no, I finished the story, I'm moving on to different projects. I think Anne Rice did that too with her Lestat stories.
Ooh, Anne Rice, classic.
The first 3 were really good. Interview with the Vampire Lestat, and Queen of the Damned. And then she started adding more and more on after that main plot was over, and I lost interest after the main plot was over because I felt like the story was done.
Yeah,
Which is
I've felt that way before about some. I don't know. Yeah. Hello. I know you don't watch any of these, but I felt that way before about some animes.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah.
like linger after like main plot.
It is something in the world of indie authors that a lot of people subscribe to the idea of writing these endless series, either in novel forms or they'll do novelettes or novellas, because the idea is to create a story that people will buy, and then the types of the trilogies or box sets, omnibuses really is what they're called, sell better than just standalone novels in the indie publishing world, because people want to spend time in that world. And so I think what you were talking about before, in terms of people going too far, instead of just writing a satisfying 3, 5, 7 book series, they'll create this whole, endless world, which almost feels like a soap opera,
yeah.
and after a while, it's like this story is just going on and on and on and on, and that's not satisfying to me. I like to spend time with my characters that I like, but I also want the when you're reading this type of fiction, you want to hit the beat points.
Season, and a lot of fans are like, thank God, because it's just been like the main character's not really the main character anymore. They keep adding new heroes. This is the main character, Barry's revealing his identity to everybody. It doesn't even seem like he's married to Iris. Like it's just on and on and on. And people are like, it should have ended in season 4 or season 5. And that's a case where audience members really either watch for one character to keep it going or have left, because they're like, this story is just never ending. And it's not. And part of it is like the pandemic kind of messed them up in one season. Because they had to jump from like the end of what I think it was season 7 to like the beginning, and they had to like wrap that up. But in terms of planning, I know Supernatural was supposed to end in season 5. And then they were like, oh, maybe we want to do another season. That's why season 5 feels like such a series ender, because it was supposed to be the ending. And then CW, I think, greenlit it for another one. And then Eric Kripke, who does The Boys, he left because that was supposed to be like the mark point, because they had only planned for 5 seasons.
Right, yeah. Television takes a lot of money to produce, and movies take a lot of money to produce. And it is a merging of creativity and enterprise and commerce. And the reason that some of those shows go on is because people are still watching them, and so there's a market for it, and that's the enterprise part. And so they go, no, we're going to order another couple of seasons, and then they expect their creative team to do something that will keep people on board, because it employs people and it makes people a lot of money. In doing some of the latest book that I wrote is Mungwort. That came out of doing a short film project. And in doing that short film, I did a lot of collaboration with my friend Chip Warren, who is a screenwriter out in LA. He's doing podcasts right now, actually. But he and I collaborated on the script that eventually became the novel Mungwort. The script is called I Ain't Gonna Work on Lilith's Farm No More. But when we were collaborating on that, one of the things, after we hit all of the major beats in Acts 1, 2, and 3, and nailed down the ending to a degree that we were happy with it, we went back through and we said, look, this is going to be an indie budget movie. So we're going to have to truncate a lot of the scenes. We're going to have to get rid of some of these characters. These 3 characters can be one character. This setting that we have in a barn needs to be out in the woods somewhere, so that we don't have to buy a barn, and we don't have to pay those actors. This scene is going to require a lot of either practical effects or CGI, so let's change what's going on here to make it just as horrific, but make it easier to film. And so you have to keep in mind the amount of money that you're pouring into this, because you won't get that money out. And so my point is, these shows like Pretty Little Liars or anything from the Arrowverse or any of those shows that seem to go on forever, like long past their due dates, it's because they were making money and advertising dollars were being poured into it, and it was employing a whole lot of people. And so a long time ago, I used to feel the same way. I was like, I can't believe they're still doing this. And I still kind of feel the same way. It's like, yeah, it's gone on a little bit too long. I'm not going to watch it, but I understand now why they're doing it.
I was kind of like that with like book to movie to or series adaptions. Where like I know for Twilight, a lot of people are like, this scene isn't in the books, and I was like, well, they're shooting it for a hour and such like movie. You can't fit all of all of the beats in there.
Not everything from a book is gonna make the movie.
Yeah, because I didn't watch Harry Potter because my mom was like, it's magic, and then I got older and she was like, oh no, you're fine. I was like, okay. So I did Twilight, which is still technically magic. It's vampires and werewolves. But I remember the whole Twilight craze, and I know people were getting upset, like, oh, this wasn't in the book, and like this wasn't in the movie, and that was in the movie, and I'm like, it's a movie. It's not like a TV series where they.
Like, well, that's a novella, and it's a really short novella. And so I spent another 3 months adding scenes, chapters, and expanding that world, and was able to flesh it out for another 43,000 words, so it would be novel length. And it ended up being 77,000 words, and that's still a really short novel. But that's just that's an indicator of what you're dealing with a movie versus a novel. A novel gives you the time and the space and the breadth and the ability to expand things, to put it wherever you wanted to go. When I was adapting the script to the novel, I didn't have to think about characters, actors, settings, CGI. I just did what I wanted to do, and was able to have fun with it that way. And so it would be interesting if we were ever able to get the screenplay produced, and I don't know if we will or not. That's a completely different world. To see that up there versus what ended up in the novel. There, I already know there's several things that would not have made the screenplay already, because we cut them out, or we couldn't do it because we were trying to keep the budget low. And that's why, I remember when the Lord of the Rings trilogy came out, there was an online petition begging the director to make it good. Like, please don't, include this, don't drop this. And I feel like they did a really good job. Peter Jackson did a great job of the trilogy. But then you look at what happened with The Hobbit, and you go, that was like half a movie. The book was half a movie. You didn't need to turn that into 3 movies, because that's an example of going too wide and trying to include everything that a novel has done, to the detriment of story. And that's the balance. Is you have to have the good story. It has to hit all the beats. You have to maintain the audience's interest. But like you said before, they're two different mediums, and people going to a movie are looking for a tight, compact story, versus people sitting down with a novel and are expected to spend at least a couple of days, if not I'm a slow reader. I spend a couple of weeks with my books.
I once read a manga series in an hour, so for a novel, it depends on how big it is. Sometimes I can finish it in a day if I do nothing but read.
So you are not a slow reader.
I am not. I'm a very fast reader. If I really like something, I will read it like usually I would read like my books in a day. Like I'd rent 20 from the library, read them all in like a day, and then my mom would be like, we're not coming back tomorrow. We're going to come back next week. And I'd be like, gosh darn it.
My oldest daughter would read books. She would rip through them, but then go back over the course of a couple of weeks and reread it again, because she would miss over parts and skip over things. It doesn't matter. She was still reading. She still enjoyed it. One of back to the AI thing, the name of the tool that I was thinking of is called Pseudo-Write, SUDOWRITE. It's Joanna Penn has talked about using it before, and I've used it a couple of times. It's somewhat useful. It depends on what you need it for. There's on her site, there's the creativepen.com. she has a whole list of AI writing tools and services that you can go and it's for journalism, marketing. So AI, back to that original conversation, AI is
That's
becoming
right.
more and more cool that people use.
Yeah, for sure. So my next question for you, uh, what do you feel like you're naturally better at, dialogue or narration? And how do you conceptualize dialogue and narration? For instance, I think of narration as something that punctuates dialogue and slows the story down to keep it from being just all dialogue. But I'm naturally good with dialogue myself, so what do you feel like you're writing most of the time?
Um, I used to be really, really bad at dialogue, especially when I first started out. I remember reading back over some of the first stories I wrote when I was in 11th and 12th grade. It's like, ugh, people don't talk this way. I, I love dialogue now. I love writing dialogue now. It gives you a chance to create different voices and different personalities for the characters that you have. Um, and I think what you're talking about in terms of the difference between narration and dialogue, you've got to have a balance of both.
Yeah.
And it depends on what genre you're working in sometimes. But since we're talking about genre fiction, narration can, and then also you're talking about point of view. So if you're looking at third person point of view, narration can, if you do it right, can provide a little bit of exposition. It can provide a little bit of beauty of language. Again, depending on the audience's interest. And that works really well in novels as well. And I feel like I have an equally good time writing both of them. It just depends on what it is I'm trying to create. I know in rough drafting, whenever I write dialogue, I know that a scene is that in the rough draft, it always goes on much longer than it needs to. Because I just have fun having a couple of characters talk and allow them to get where they need to be. It also, with dialogue, you can also infuse, if you want to, you can throw some humor in there. You can do that with narration as well. Just it's a little bit easier if you have a specific character that has a good sense of humor. Because I kind of feel like I'm rambling here, but I do enjoy writing both of them. I don't know how great I am at both of them. I just know that I like doing dialogue probably a little bit more, just because of that give and take, and you can make a scene crackle with good dialogue. But then with narration, you can show the beauty of language. You can describe things really well. You can hide details. If you're writing a mystery story or a horror story, you can foreshadow without letting people know it was foreshadowing, like the M. Night Shyamalan style of doing things.
Both are totally important. I feel like both offers such very two different aspects to a story. I remember when I was in freshman year of high school, we were reading Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and I love dialogue. In fact, for a while, I thought I was going to be more of a playwright than a fiction writer. And then there's the scene in Romeo and Juliet where Mercutio dies, and the stage direction is literally just Mercutio dies. And
Yeah.
I was like, and I was like, no, this is boring. Wait a minute. Like, I want there to be a paragraph or two of his dramatic death. Like, I don't want this to just be Mercutio dies. And so from that point on, I was much more interested in writing fiction, because I knew there was novelty in paragraphs of narration to really slow a scene down and make it dramatic and punchy. So
yeah. I've heard screenplays and plays themselves are just blueprints for the director. And so when you see Mercutio dies, it's up to the director to figure out how that's going to be staged,
Sure.
or if it's a movie, how that's going to look. Whereas in a novel, you get to be a little bit more artistic, without being overly dramatic at the same time.
Right.
I have some experience with having to figure out how something dies, because in high school, or not high school, in middle school, we decided we had to write something for drama class and put on a play, and ours was a horror, a chicken. So the plot was every 25 years this chicken comes to this high school and kills all the students. Very middle school plot.
Right.
Very terrible. But there were scenes where we had to figure out how because this chicken was picking off the students one by one, and my little cousin, she came up when she came and saw it, and she loved the chicken. She was absolutely enthralled. She was like, "This is amazing." and she was so little. But we'd have to, he had to pick us up and carry us off screen. And I remember when my character died, he ended up tripping, and so the scream I let out, because it's supposed to let out a fake scream, ended up being real because I fell back with him, and people were like, "Oh my god, that scream sounded so real," and I was like, "That's because it was." He tripped and he fell, and I was like, "Oh god." But like that, I know how, like, because I'd have scenes in my head, and I was directing with my friends, and I was like, people got to be like this, and they have to be like this, and the chicken has to carry out like that, and he has to wear like this.
Right.
And I was very like particular. And then for creative writing, I wrote a horror story where this woman comes out of a grave every like Halloween, and she just murders a person for their house, and just
Right.
kind of stays there and then murders this town and then leaves. And I always liked writing the around, the dialogue would always last for me. Because I was like, I like planning things, and I like showing you the scene, and this is how this goes. And then
So, next question. Do you do any other activities that reinforce your love for writing? I've been listening to the Brandon Sanderson podcast recently, and he talks about how he plays D&D. How there's always that creative element that's kind of like writing where you craft characters and stuff in D&D.
Yeah. And weirdly, I never got into D&D and I grew up during the time period when it was super popular. I don't know why I didn't get into it. I loved reading Tolkien. I loved reading fantasy when I was a kid, and I never did any D&D. Maybe playing video games when I was a kid was a version of that. Although I don't game very much anymore. I don't have time for it. I would say reading definitely helps inform a lot of writing. If you're going to be a writer, you have to read. And to that end, I probably watch too many shows on television and too many movies, but that's also something I enjoy doing. And, you kind of immerse yourself in storytelling by doing it. But outside of that, I play a lot of music, and I write and record my own stuff. And so other than the technical aspect of it, you're flexing a creative muscle that has nothing to do with the muscle that I flex whenever I write, but it's still something that's creative. And that's rejuvenating, especially because I just do music for fun. I've been in tons of bands over the last 25 years, and for a while there, early on, I was trying to be in a band that we could make money on and pay the bills. And then I got a family, and I had to actually do something that made money and paid the bills for them. And so now it's totally fun. And it's a hobby, but I get to be, like I said, I get to be creative in a way that doesn't involve, unless I'm writing lyrics, that doesn't involve writing books or scripts or short stories. And it really is rejuvenating. It's because I still get to be creative, and I don't have to care about any of that other stuff. I will say that songwriting also has, especially if you're writing a typical pop song, it follows a pop song follows the same beats as a novel, the same beats as a short story. It's just for a particular song. You got to have your verse, chorus, verse specifically about George R.R. Martin.
like how he in terms of when Game of Thrones was happening, the series was ahead of the books.
Right.
Um
In the last season, yeah.
Yeah, in the last season. And so he's like, I have this book already. It's coming. And people are like, okay. And then it's like, they're like, all right, where's the book? You said it was coming, and now it's, and he seems to take a very long time to get these out. And it's almost like he can't almost handle the overwhelming popularity of his own series. He's kind of just banking on the fact that when people will just wait, and people will just buy, even though a lot of people are very they're very impatient, I guess would be the word.
Yeah, I don't know. I know I read something recently that reported that he said he's not even going to finish that book, even though a portion of it is done. I don't know what's going on specifically with him. I have a feeling that since he doesn't have to finish it, because it's already kind of been done in one way, that he's just going to take his time with it. I don't know if he's reveling in it or leading people on with it. And I also know that he was ill, and so his illness might have something to do with this taking a lot of time. And creativity is a lot harder than what people think it is, especially when even when you're well, it's a really, really difficult job, and so that might be something that's stopping him from doing it. I think, mentioning Anne Rice again, she started a series a long, long time ago in the 80s that she never finished. It was called Ramses the Dead. It was about a mummy. And I'm not sure. I think she might have written one more, even though that was a planned series. So I know it's frustrating because he's on his last book and we all kind of know where it's going. I'd like to see his take on it, because I didn't think they did a really good job with the HBO with some of the plotting. I think they sped it up too fast, and it would be interesting to see him take his time with it. But I'm not sure of any other authors who have had something similar go on. Oh, well, Stephen King did that with his the Dark Tower series. He would write one book and then leave it alone for 7 years, and then come back to it and write another book, and then leave it alone for 7 years. And so sometimes it has to do with where they are in their careers and what they want to do creatively. And sometimes maybe a series just falls apart. Maybe they just lose the thread, lose the impetus for getting it done. And they're already on to other projects, especially if it's gone on for too long. So I think there's a lot of factors in there that would lead to something like that.
As a writer myself, I am learning that less is more, and to pull back when I want to write something disturbing or impactful. As a horror author yourself, how do you feel like you have to pull back, or if you could elaborate on those experiences?
Yeah, when I was, so I recently changed counties, and for 18 years I taught creative writing, and I don't have that class anymore. So when I was teaching creative writing, I would tell my students exactly what you just said is, first of all, show, don't tell. And when it comes to anything that is similar to violence or something similar, anything that can be exaggerated, don't paint the pages with blood. The scary, if you're specifically talking about horror, the scariest part of horror is not when the thing happens, whatever that thing is, where the murder happens, the person dies. That's the release of all the tension. And if you go on and on about the buckets of blood and the groaning and the gurgling that occurs, you've already lost the audience, because you're now taking over what should be the falling action or the denouement. Instead, you're just drawing out the climax, and that makes the climax less impactful. And I also find it just distasteful. But back to my main point, the scariest part of a horror scene is the moments building up to that climax. And so that's where you want to spend a majority of your time. That's where you want to show all the details, let the reader know that something's bad is about to happen. They just don't know what it is, or maybe they do know what it is and they're waiting for it to happen. They can't take it. And then you let them off the hook and you move on to the next thing. But also, you need to, in terms of horror, if you haven't created characters that your audience likes, or that they're worried about, then nobody cares. Nobody cares about their deaths, and that's where storytelling comes in. That's where Stephen King is such the master of this, is because he creates characters that everybody wants to live. That's why the novel series was so popular. It wasn't just about putting kids in jeopardy. You just really liked all of those characters. You didn't want any of them to get hurt. Same thing with Harry Potter. Same thing with Stranger Things. All those characters are great. Those kids are awesome. They're great characters. You don't want them to get hurt, but they're in a horror movie, so one of them's going to.
Right.
And
Yeah.
spend more time developing the human connection than the splatterpunk aspect of it, and you'll have better results.
Yeah, I like the way that you put that. When things get violent and gory, that's actually the release of the tension. That's not the tension itself. I'm going to remember that. That segues into a sub-question I had, which is a little unrelated, a little related. I'm noticing that when it comes to writing, less is more, as we just described, except when it comes to character agency. I'm writing a secret project right now, And it's just secret just because I'm just going to try to trad publish it. But the thing about it is the things that I've been giving to readers to look at, they'll make notes that some of the characters are unlikable because it doesn't seem like they're actually making their own decisions. They're maybe being dragged along by a plot, or that they really do just go along with things. And was it is a long fantasy story, and so I wanted the main characters to be more discovery characters that explore this new fantasy world as opposed to forces of nature in of themselves that assert. But people didn't like that. They loved it when characters, agent, when they actually assert. And so now I've gone back a little bit and given the characters, I've actually tried to not, I forced it a little bit. Like I now I've made them a lot more front and center, and that's starting to make the story a lot more likable. And so to me, it feels like actually it's less is more, except when it comes to agency. You have to drive agency home. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, that's one of the frequent comments I got in a lot of my early fiction as well. Is it seems like your main characters are along for the ride. Why don't you give them a goal? And like you said, give them more agency. And because the readers want to be like that main character, especially if you've made them likable, rather than just allowing things to happen or responding to things to happen. And so that's definitely, I think, one of the most important things to do is not just make your characters likable, but give them agency, give them more than just responding to events. And just the thing that pops into mind again is the novel It. You have these kids who initially are somewhat victims of Pennywise as he goes about all of his nefarious plans. But very early on, they decide they're going to stop it, and there you go. You've got your plot. They're going to go figure out how to put an end to this thing. Same thing with Stranger Things. The Cabin in the Woods is another a great example of this, of a movie character deciding I'm going to figure out what's going on and put a stop to this. And again, that's just one genre, but I think that's why people like detective fiction so much, is because the detective has a goal every single time. I'm going to figure out what happened, and I'm going to bring the world to rights.
Is there anything that isn't musical or TV show that inspires you, like being out in nature or going to a store and going, ooh, that would fit in X book?
Probably, I just don't have anything off the top of my head. I mean, your experience form your art, certainly. And I know with the stuff that I'm writing, especially the series that I'm writing right now, I'm setting it in this area in Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, South Stafford. And so those things will definitely show up, as well as the types of people and landmarks and things like that. I don't know if there's anything I purposefully go out and seek. Just because I happen to be writing about this area, which I know fairly well at this point, that they're going to be in there. But there's nothing that I seek to look for inspiration necessarily. I mean, unless it's just trying to be healthy and going to the gym, playing soccer, making sure that I get my daily amount of sunlight so that I'm happy and healthy and I can write, trying to get enough sleep.
So my next question is, do you ever mark up books? How do you feel about marking up books as you read them do you mark them in the pages, or are you more of a sticky notes kind of guy?
Not when I'm reading. No, I read for entertainment. And so if it's a school project, when we weren't all digital, I learned how to mark up the books and underline stuff, especially with stuff that was difficult for me to understand, or something that I was going to end up writing a paper on for English. But I mean, now mainly I read on a Kindle, and people underline stuff and work with it all the time. I just find that too cumbersome, and also I don't want to. I'm reading for entertainment. I'm reading for the plot, and I don't need to stop and underline something and think about it when I'm just reading for that reason. But if I have no problem with other people doing it.
My mother has a thing with going out to antique stores, and I don't know what happened in the last few years. The pandemic took all the Nancy Drew books out of these antique stores, but right before the pandemic, she used to love going out to antique malls, and they used to have a huge thing of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. And she was really into Nancy Drew when she was coming up, and now Nancy Drew is actually an old, really old, fiction piece. And I'll flip through some of these old hardcover ones where the pages are falling out and they're all crispy yellow. and they're like signed and written and dotted by like people from like the 50s and stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is haunted. This is straight haunted. Like it's like stuff from like notes from people like, hey, I got you this for your daughter, let me know how the kids like it, and it's just like written in there, and there's all these like it's so interesting to see almost like a folk history, a meta folk history being told through the pages of this seemingly mainstream storybook from times long gone. It's very intriguing.
It is interesting to read other people's comments and see what their take on it was. Sometimes, like, you'll read a comment I remember doing this in college a lot. I'll read a comment on a particular passage, and I was thinking the same thing. I was like, oh, cool, I'm right. Somebody else thought the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, completely with college, because, of course, when that was a former student, I'm sure that former student was marking that book up left and right.
Yeah,
In fact, Diana, didn't you give me a book forever ago called like The Sound of the Wind? It was like a fantasy.
It's the name of the wind.
The Name of the Wind, and that thing was marked to hell and back.
That's because my Germanic college teacher said, I want you to mark up, I want you to analyze, I want you to write notes. And so I took advantage of that, and I analyzed, and I wrote in it, and I circled things, and I was like, oh, this is weird. Oh, this verb or this word has been used way too many times. A little tiring.
Doing it. I mean, like I said, if I'm reading for entertainment, I don't necessarily do it unless I come across something that is particularly interestingly written. But I had to do professional development. I have to re-up my license for the next 10 years, and I was writing a research paper on universal design for learning, and so my mindset when I was going through all these articles, and I was doing this totally on my laptop, was I was highlighting information either that I needed to explain to myself again, and I would write notes to myself just to figure out what they were conceptually going for, or I was highlighting things that I knew I was going to use in the paper. So I could easily go back instead of having to read through this document again. I go like, nope, there's a first quote, there's a paragraph I was going to use. So it also depends on what your medium is going to be. It's your book. I mean, I think we're trained. Well, when I was a kid, we were trained by the librarians, like, don't mess with the book. You don't ruin the book. It's not yours. But if it's your book, do whatever you want to it.
Yeah,
no, that's exactly how I feel. I feel like there's this weird like voice judging me, but I'm like, no, that's okay. I'm just gonna destroy this book.
Okay, but what he does is he does this weird thing with the pages. Instead of using a bookmark, the pages.
I dog eat ear like mad.
It's so.
I dog eat ear like nobody's business.
And I've given him bookmarks. I'm like, here's a bookmark for you. Here's a hand-drawn bookmark that I made specifically for you. And then he'll show me like he's reading some page, and it's like doggy-eared, like it's like half of the page is just doggy-eared, and I'm like, I gave you this bookmark. Where did you put it?
That's exactly why Kindles work for me. I never did. I just use bookmarks, or I'd set the book upside down, like on the page. But now the book just opens to the page that I left off on, so I don't have to worry about any of that.
Heck yeah, that's the way to go. Diana, would you like to ask your last question here? Number 6.
Number 6.
Number 6.
Okay. So I have this question where it's, when you read a book, what elements would you say like make or break a book in terms of it being good or an okay one?
It's back to what we were talking about before. I have to like the characters. They have, if they are unlikable characters, they at least have to be quirky or funny, or something that I haven't seen before. And I have to trust the writer. And what I mean is that the writer is not going to drown me in exposition, that from the get-go I feel like I'm in this world, and that the world is something that I can believe, that I'm not being told too much information, that the characters are behaving in a way that people actually behave, and not acting in a way that the author wants them to act, because that's how they feel they should act, that they say things that people say. One of the book series that I'm reading right now, the Crimson Lake series, even though I like that series because of some of these quirkiness of specifically one of the characters, there is an aspect of it that I find unbelievable in some of her mannerisms and some of the things that she says. And I can appreciate what the author is doing, but when the aspect of that character's personality comes out that I don't believe, it kind of takes me out of the story. It doesn't kind of take me out of the story. What I started thinking is nobody would do that. Even this character who is damaged in a way that this author says that this character is damaged, it's a little bit too much. And so that's what keeps me in. What keeps me in that particular story is the main character, who is not the crazy weirdo that this other character is, even though she's a main character as well. And so, and plot holes. It doesn't matter if it's literary fiction, genre fiction, especially in detective fiction. It's weird that I'm still reading this series. The plot hole bothered me, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, but there's a major plot hole in the going to create believable situations, that they're going to create believable characters that even though I know where these beats are going, that I trust them to take me down this path so that I'll enjoy the ride.
Yeah, that is, and that sounds like a great segue to fall into our last question here. With authors making believable or unbelievable stories, how do you, James Noll, feel like you'll be remembered in regards to writing and all the stories you've written? And how do you feel like you'll leave behind a legacy?
Yeah, I have no idea. I hope that I feel like I'm still learning how to do this. With the latest book, Mungwort, I feel by working with my friend Chip that it was a leap forward in being able to write a novel that was as trustworthy and satisfying as some of the ones that I've read in the past. But I feel like I've got a long way to go. I hope that people like what I'm trying to do in terms of using genre fiction, in writing genre fiction. I like to infuse my stories with some humor, not to the point where it's wacky and zany anymore. I definitely started out that way, writing more horror comedy infusions. I'd like to hear them say what I just told you. I trusted this author. He wrote good stuff. I knew that when I was writing or reading one of his stories, that it was going to be a fun, satisfying ride. I don't know if I'm there yet. I don't know if I'll ever get there yet, but I'm definitely going to keep on trying.
I'm in the same boat. I'm obviously, way behind you in terms of the publishing experience and the business side of things, as well as the CV of hard writing alone. Because I remember when we went to the comic and toy convention, you just were like giving away those like books. It's like $1, and I'm like, oh yeah. Wow. I'm like, whoa, I just can't do that with my stuff.
Yeah, but I've been doing this is year 6, and that was inventory that I bought 5 years ago, and so that's that would have been on the sale rack at the grocery store on the way out.
I hope that I'm just remembered for being like a pretty cool writer who does like weird things and also does art on the side.
An artist writer. There we go.
Artist writer.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd probably be remembered for poetry because I have a lot of poetry that I've written floating around online here and there. Like, if you come across me, no, you didn't. But thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun.
And go ahead and check out Mungwort. That's the tale of our times right now, tale of the decade.
That's right.
Heck yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty. Peace out.
Peace out.
I'm Salt.
I'm Vinegar.
And you just watched the Salt and Vinegar podcast. Yay!